Welcome to the PI Podcast, Political Insights for the Palaging Inis. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is my co-host, political scientist, meme lord, and Gordon Ramsay of film criticism, Borge.
Hindi pa naman. No, no,
Ilang
no.
pa yan?
Are we? Are we the two old guys from the Muppet Show?
We should probably change our logos to that. Yeah.
PI nyo, PI nating lahat. Borge at your service.
I'm sure that people sitting right next to us in the cinemas would think we are annoying. Pansin mo, parang ingay namin. So we are back from quite fresh from watching the, how do you say, political box office battle of the season, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
Basically, if you've been living under a rock, two movies about the Marcoses and martial law have been released side by side. You have Maid in Malacañang, which is produced by Amy Marcos and directed and written by Daryl Yap, who've been covered before. And all of a sudden, Maid in Malacañang was promoted much earlier. And then you have Katips, which is a adaptation of a stage musical depicting the lives of activists during First Quarter Storm and eventually martial law. And we decided to inspect and see what all the fuss was about. Make it a day out. We don't go out that often, so might as well. And whoa! So yesterday, Borge, how was it? Any general leftover emotions and comments from the experience we had? Of course, it's nice seeing you again as usual, but
that was a long ass weird day. We started watching the damn thing by 1 p.m. So we started with Maid in Malacanang. Then we wound up with Katips in the last few hours before 6. So general impression was a headache first and foremost.
Oh yeah,
it was a headache. And I think this is something that I would elaborate later on, but I will just lay it out right now. Those movies are not meant for any non-partisan creatures. It's a hard watch for anyone who is non-partisan or who are more or less aligned with third, fourth parties. Those movies are meant for their to pander to their intended audiences. They're not meant to teach the other side. Really not. So
what can you say about the intention? It's everyone's been giving it, like, for instance, there are like side-by-side comparisons of like the cinemas tickets and seats being filled up. Of course, there's some that showing the box office saying that 41.8 million in Katips with 41 million of Made in Malacanang. In fact, to me, it's as if that they're trying to make this as a rematch for the elections, as if your movie tickets are like ballots, in some. So I don't know. I mean, is there a point? Like, you're right in saying that it caters to your in beliefs if you choose that. Like your Katips, it shows you like more or less what you want to know. That's saying that martial law is bad, activism good. But Made in Malacanang, it caters to saying the Marcoses are actually good, humanized even. So I don't know. And there are even parts about, again, when they're saying that it's part of historical distortion. They're highlighting certain scenes where the way that they depicted Cory, playing mahjong with the Carmelite nuns, which they say never happened. Even the journalist who said that that's not what I meant. And they're refusing to apologize, saying, "Oh, but I read between the lines," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but it's again. What do you think about the battle of reviews? Even
battle of reviews. First and foremost, it is being politicized, and that is not a surprise. That's a surprise. Again, there's an ongoing battle for our. We have a political identity crisis. So Filipinos love films. We love watching movies.
Right.
So it's inevitable, it's unavoidable, and it would continue on. This would not be the last. That such a battle would be held. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think this would be the last of the installment. There may be a trilogy here. Who knows? But this is not the last time we would see anything about the Marcoses in a supposed intimate fashion. So yeah, politicization is not a surprise. Personally, I find it pathetic. But it is as it is. So again, it's a fight for political identity.
Right.
Second, regarding the, are they even I have the impression that
historical.
yeah, regarding this historical distortion. Just a disclaimer for those who are listening. For me, I don't want to approach these two movies from the perspective of historical factuality. So I
Yeah.
think we can leave that to the other reviews.
Mhm.
Historians would have a open season on this.
Yeah,
You can
and
check out
Alberto
their own
Campo
work. Yeah.
already made a review
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Of course, there were some eyebrow raising moments there. It is quite. There's something that I would say that they have provided a relatively one-sided perspective of the entire event, which is
Right.
again, which is fine. It's the purpose of the movie, but one thing, just one example, I think they forgot to portray Imelda packing diamonds into diapers, so that's something
Oh,
left out.
wow.
Again, that's an established fact when they arrived in costumes. So
Mhm.
then again, that was left out in the movie. So again, I would not make any further comments on it from a factual perspective. I would rather focus on it as an artifact, an
Mhm.
artifact that appealed at the level of psychology. So political
Right.
psychology would be apt. So that's how I would approach it.
I mean, a lot of movies have been made about historical figures, political
Mm.
figures. You have Oliver Stone famously
Mm.
doing it to several presidents. You'd have, of course, the Frost Nixon interviews.
Mm.
You'd have, of course, the many movies about Jose Rizal, the
Mm.
many movies about Emilio Aguinaldo, for example.
Mm.
uh, there you have Monconfiado, and then you have A. Restregan. The two very different depictions of Aguinaldo. One is an action hero, the other one as Monconfiado's typical villainous gangster goon look. My God, even as Aguinaldo, he looks like a goon, but he's great whenever he is.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you don't expect it to be historically factual. In fact, there's usually this thing called cinematic license, wherein at least the director wants to highlight a particular aspect of it. You can maybe even valorize or maybe even somewhat criticize and deconstruct. In fact, there was a time where I'm trying to remember, like there's one year when there was multiple films about Winston Churchill. I think one by John. I can't try to remember. I think on the side of
Brian. One would be by Brian Cox, I think. The
yes,
other would be by
Gary Oldman. I'm
Gary
not sure if it's the
Oldman.
same year. Yeah,
Orchestra. Not the same year, but again, multiple films almost.
right. Yeah.
So
And then another one is like Steve Jobs. That one was in the same year. One played by Ashton Kutcher of all people, and the other one by Michael Fassbender. So two different approaches to Steve Jobs. But again, if we judge it by film, and not by history, oddly enough, I think I've said this before. It's weird that it's not history that convinces. In fact, history is somewhat bland and boring statement of facts and even narratives, but it's not the history books that stay with us. It's usually the myths. It's usually the emotional connection with us. And these are perhaps the more potent political tools that it's not about, again, facts. In a way, it's about feelings that can, in a way, manipulate people. In both forms of propaganda, in a way, they both are manipulative, in some sense. One is more effective than the other.
Yeah, one is more effective than the other.
Clearly, by far. But we'll see which one depending on our review, because we're going to do that one by one. But right now, I think we have to say clearly, as they like this, it should not be considered "quote unquote" as historical, as in the historical genre. It's in a way circumstantial, I suppose.
No,
It's
no,
actually
no.
historical, or
Historical drama to an extent may okay. First and foremost, historical drama may have a measure of creative license. Yes. But if you would look at the patterns, there's not one single definitive movie about a single person or a very the more controversial a person is, the more controversial a character is, the more movies are made about that person.
Right.
So I think it is high time that another movie about Marcos may be made by those who are in the opposing side. If they can bear to give a fair-handed, because that's the thing. For example, the multiple movies about Winston Churchill. The Darkest Hour gave a picture of Winston Churchill during his rise to the prime ministerial position. So it's Winston under a crisis. The other movie starring Brian Cox, Churchill, showed Winston Churchill as this nuisance who's already, he's no longer a more relevant figure because he's already in the latter part of the war. So you have these two types of Churchills: the hero, the one who saves the day, and the other one who is already an annoying, a nuisance.
Right.
So again, historical films, the creative license may be a bit thin. It's not supposed to be abused, but there's much space for multiple movies showing multiple dimensions on a controversial figure.
Right.
Another one regarding history. It's something I read from Jose Ortega y Gasset a few days ago. History is relevant because it is something we carry in the present. So it has an impact because it is something that makes something present, something in the past relevant now.
Yes.
And the impact or the intended or the supposed, the planned effect of both movies, I would still classify them as history to an extent, or as part of our history making. That would be a more appropriate term, part of our history making. It tries to make something from the past relevant now. And this is where the issue of effectiveness comes in.
Right.
So
yeah. But again, it's funny, people are interested in history not necessarily because of history books, but again because of like either TV or movie portrayals. People
whether they can
remember
relate
John
to it.
Arcelia, because it's like you hear them, you see them as their visual and their audiovisual representations. I think the most we can say, for example, see about Emilio Aguinaldo is when he was captured, and when he was speaking in Spanish, very soft spoken, very grainy. Although there are some movies that depict him as like in color, but it's not great quality. So you need an actual living person to, give that person form, to materialize and embody that historical figure. But at the same time, is it that person? Representations of these people are not the same as the people themselves. Cesar Montano is not necessarily Ferdinand Marcos. No matter how hard you try, but whether it is it is effective to the purpose of the film, we shall see. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think so. So in a way, we are here about to discuss this, and it's going to be a double feature again, back to back, same way. And in a way, we watched it, so you don't have to, maybe think about what we have to say, but maybe if you're curious, go ahead and see and watch it. All right. So we shall start now with Maid in Malacañang. We started with that. That was the first movie we watched yesterday. And so the first thing that you notice, one of the first frames is actually a documentary style text saying this is based on true events. Although in Tagalog, I don't remember exactly.
No, it's not even based on true events. It's a bit more. It's a bit more underhanded. We could not quote it because we forgot to take a picture of the damn thing.
We're not allowed to take pictures.
Yeah, we're not allowed to take pictures. But I think it goes in the way that the movie contains certain real events. It's not hindi siya traditional na based on true events or based on real events. So it's a bit more. It's a modified disclaimer, which is quite annoying.
Yeah,
but, that's postmodernism for you.
We can't even like quote it right now because it's a bit twisted and all that. But I do remember
it's not common.
Parang Diyos ang saksi.
Yeah, meron pa yan.
Why say that? That's what I remembered. It's like saying, it's as if like we swear this is what happened in a way. Or
I think it goes. I think the essence of the first was these are the stories that were kept, that were to an extent hidden for years, and now it's being exposed. So So I think that's the main thesis of that screen. And again, the disclaimer about the content regarding whether it's true or not, it's a bit weird and unusual. It's an unusual disclaimer. It's not the usual based on true events. It's something. It contains real things. I think we should have taken pictures of them.
Again, we should probably maybe we can do a follow up and see like what exactly those texts say, because it's like, oh, you're asking us to read now. I don't know. I mean, it's odd. I mean, I don't know.
It's a very odd starting point
with an with conviction. It's not even like a matter of fact. It's like Diyos ang saksi. And I don't know. I mean, the first thing that pops in is like an 80s version of Nosi Balasi, which is Sino ba sila, which is like in a way distorts the intention of the original song. You say no si Balasi, sino ba sila? It's actually like either earnestly asking a question, or what's the word? It's doing this like sino ba sila? A expression of indignation. Who do they think they are? So in some sense, depending on your side, maybe you could take one meaning or the other. But I think it's kind of clever of song choice. No si
Yeah, I think
Balasi.
that's a cover of the original.
Sino?
Yeah,
Sino ba sila? Sino Sampaguita, no?
No, it was a different one. The one used in the movie is a cover.
Yeah, but the original song was
Yeah,
Sampaguita.
the original song was Sampaguita, which is again it's pop music, but
Of the
it's
time.
of the time, but they appropriated it, which is
Yeah. And oddly enough, one of the earliest scenes is, of course, I think the main character, arguably, is you'd expect it to be someone else, maybe the Marcoses. It's, of course, Amy Marcos, who is, you know, strange bedfellows with Daryl Yap, who have been creating, I suppose, content, like satirizing the Lenny supporters and Kakampinks, etc. And now this is I suppose maybe not the culmination, but the biggest one yet. She's also
biggest
a
one yet.
creative. Yeah, she's the creative producer, and now, of course, noticeably, parang siya yung bidang-bida eh. But sinasabi ko sa inyo, parang she's almost the hero of the piece. Like,
no, but spoiler alert,
center.
she's the maid in Malacañang.
Yeah. Oh, I think we should say this, that this review contains spoilers, but again, you can get your own observations, but these are ours based on the details. So yeah, she is the number one. Christine Reyes, who plays Amy Marcos, is the most active character in the entire cast, and which is fine. I know she did her job well, but at the same time, it kind of makes you think. In some ways, what do you think is she trying to do? Like, is it like, is it to make Amy Marcos look good? In some ways, she emasculated both her brother and father.
Yeah, the thing is, regarding the character in the movie, again, the situation is that they're under siege. But the problem is, how can you depict a siege from within? So she embodied the frantic, chaotic nature, or the chaotic nature of the outside. That's why she's all over the place. She's active, she's aggressive, because that's the impact of the outside world within the household. So again, it's an effective. Again, giving credit where it's due. Christine Reyes actually effectively conveyed that sense of frantic, paranoia, and to an extent despair, without showing the outside world. So they're not. We could barely see the outside world, the protesters, except for some snippets.
Right.
But still, throughout the movie, she was able to effectively create that environment of frantic paranoia and panic.
I mean, if you notice, this is typical of Daryl Yap's style. Like, I think the reason why he has multiple contracts with Viva Studios, is that he's able to work for cheap. And most of not only does he have a small cast, relatively small cast, but he is also is able to work in small controlled spaces.
Yeah.
Like, basically, it's only set in two locations. Number one, Singapore, where Amy and her family is called by McCoy Sr., who is played by Cesar Montano, who is, of course, called her back to Malacañang. And then the rest of the story is set in Malacañang. And it's almost as if it's like a stage play in itself. But because it's so small, you don't have a lot of things going on. You can focus on the characters. And it's also very dialogue heavy. And it's also heavy in exposition. But it gives you, time to focus on what's going on in the human drama. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that leads us to the next issue of the movie itself, which is the structure. Where does the propaganda come in? So,
I mean, most people would point out again with the Corey scenes, but at the same time, like, besides that, which is evident in the trailers, I think you noticed it was peppered across. Like, it's not like one big thing. It's actually quite subtle, which is actually both clever and devious. And I think people
I think subtle is I think
Yeah,
so.
I mean, we have to recognize that
Yeah.
it's actually subtle.
No, okay, okay. I think subtle is not the proper word for it because it is also in your face, but it's properly integrated.
Mm,
Uh, okay, it's not implicit. Okay, I can admit subtle. But then again, if you would watch the movie, the integration goes like this.
mm,
It's an exposition on first. It would go like an exposition on a family problem, family
yes.
issue. So it's something very private.
Mm,
Then during a quote unquote private conversation, political statements would be made.
mhm,
So political
mm,
issues would be raised.
right.
Controversy would be raised, but it is also properly combined with, family life, personal issues, personal problems,
Mhm,
and even interactions with the maids.
mhm,
So
yeah.
I think this is where the effectiveness of the propaganda in this movie goes.
Yeah.
Each private moment appeals to a specific family or private value,
Mm,
but it gets attached to a a political statement. For example,
right.
the private moment between Ella Cruz and Cesar Montano, again,
Mm,
the daughter comforting the father, or trying to convince the father to leave.
yes.
So during that conversation, they ended up discussing, we did our best, and that
Yeah.
there's combined with there's no perfect government in the first place. So
Mhm,
again, it's in the context of a daughter trying to convince a father, trying to comfort
right.
a distressed father, yet
Mhm,
they slipped in political statements
yes.
justifying the public failures of the
Mm,
Marcoses. And it
yeah.
is effective if you are not a key, if you could not separate those two, it's very difficult to
Yeah.
separate.
Yeah.
And if you're easily impressionable,
Yeah.
you will not question whatever comes out of that.
Yeah, because honestly, even like, well, even in real life, or like you will, I mean, if it's the context of the
Mm,
scene of a father and daughter, of course, the daughter would not be privy to a lot of the father's
mm,
failures and point them out
mm,
right then and there. In a way, even if she herself believed that as a daughter, or maybe even not,
mm,
at that point, she needed to get her father
mm,
out and to evacuate Malacañang, because
mm,
again, the situation there, the conflict right there is EDSA people power was happening, and they were fearing for their lives. It was
mm.
framed as like a horror movie. Like pretty
Yeah.
soon, it's in imminent danger, and
Mm,
it's weird because again, it starts out with, again, first it was their access to the outside world were the maids. And again, this comes in
mm,
through chismis. You know,
mm,
parang, ay, sabi dito, na parang dumadaming mga tao, etc. Which is played by, with an accent. And we'll talk
mm,
about the maids later. But at the same time, again, that scene ignores a lot of the realities that Ferdinand Marcos had, well, was responsible for a lot of economic problems. It was a lot of policy failures. So the fact when he was saying like, masama ba akong tao? Well, it's a qualified. So people could say yes, you are, or maybe you were well intentioned, but at the same time, there were a lot of failures.
no, that is
So
basically
the
the
counterpoint to that, which they completely, well, sidestepped, yeah,
no,
which because the situation didn't call for it,
mm.
yeah. So
That
in other words, it wasn't there to
is
say. No one was there to say that. Well, you did this, 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 this. It was only the daughter, him and the daughter, and comedically the maid that was still
and
there.
that's the
No, wait,
thing. Yeah, no,
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 they
no,
were
that's
just
a
there.
different scene.
A different scene, different scene. Yeah, yeah.
It allows the viewers to empathize with both of them,
Mhm.
and that's the dangerous part of it.
Right.
That this is one thing that makes the Maid in Malacanang effective.
Mm.
Audiences can empathize with all the characters on different levels.
Mhm.
Why? Because the movie appeals to different types of fears,
Mhm.
very human fears. So, fear
Mhm.
of losing one's lives, fear of
Mhm.
losing your loved ones, fear of
Mhm.
losing property, fear of
Yeah.
chaos, fear of change. So, these are very human fears, and the movie effectively appeals to all of them.
Yes.
And again, if you trigger the fear part of the brain, you can
Mhm.
convince anyone. Uh,
Mm.
that's a basic fact.
Yeah.
So this is where the movie becomes more effective. It is a good play on fear. Yet,
Mm.
yet, yet, it's not there's again the Daryl Yap satirist comes out with the unusual comic circumstances
Oh yeah,
popping out
especially
of
through
the
the like
through the
the character of
maids.
the maids. Yeah,
Yeah, I think so it's a
I mean,
that's well balanced. So it's
yeah, and you'd think, of course, it's called the Maid in Malacañang, so you would see, your attention be on them all of a sudden. And
mm,
so, what besides, of course, them being, I suppose, the Marcoses link to the outside world during that time, since they were basically on
mm,
lockdown. What role do you think they play in the entire narrative? Besides, of course, I think one thing I've noticed is, again, the use of chismis na parang
mm,
sabi ng ganito, ganyan,
yeah,
which again has been caused a lot of controversy with
mm,
Ella Cruz's
yeah,
statements and of course Darryl Yap himself.
yeah.
So yeah, what do you think? How is the role of the maids, particularly again the role of the
Mm.
chismis? But what else
Okay,
besides
okay.
that?
You can empathize with the Marcoses, but I think the maids is the link of the Marcoses to ordinary Filipinos.
Mm-hmm.
The viewers can empathize with the maids. So what do they empathize with? They empathize with the idea of good servants serving good masters. That's basically
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of the maids there.
Oh yeah,
To emphasize, to highlight, to press down, to nail down that idea
yeah,
that you have good servants serving
mm,
good masters.
yeah,
Uh, and that is just purely anti-democratic in all senses, but it is
yeah.
there and it is effective, and sad to say it reflects a Filipino value.
There, there are like what? Okay, there are three scenes that we can point out. I remember now. Number one, they're about to pack. When they're packing their things, they've
Mm.
remembered that, oh, Imelda gave them fur garments, and it's like, di ba? What's the word? Made lang kami, hindi dapat ano.
Mm.
Why we can't wear fur? So, bakit? Uh, dahil made ka, hindi ka makaka-fur, or
Mm.
and we'll give you a chance. I think I'm paraphrasing, but and
Mm.
Imelda, which played by
Rufo
what you call that,
Gutierrez.
Rufo Gutierrez, who, oddly enough, is well utilized, even though her
Yeah,
acting is not the best, but she's well utilized.
and
We'll get to
her
her
acting
later.
was fine. Her acting was
Yeah,
fine. It was apt.
it was apt because she wasn't given a lot to do. But anyway, um, and yeah, so this is a great gesture. That's number one. Um, and number yeah, well, let's go. But let's start with, and then the other one. Um, no, this was the maids. They're also rallying the their fellow staff, the
Yeah,
guards, the drivers,
yeah,
etc., saying that may mga iba na gusto din maban.
yeah,
They can protect
yeah. It
them
is,
from the assault, which
it is
yeah.
basically patron-client relations from the perspective of clients. Simple as that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's, we can talk about patron-client relations from the level of systems and constitutions and
Mm-hmm.
structures, but this movie shows it in its cultural dimension.
Yeah.
This is how patronage works.
Yes.
This is how you get other people's loyalties. You become a patron to them.
Actually, there are a lot of movies that highlight this, particularly in Japanese films. Like one thing that I remember is the 47 Ronin,
Mm,
starring Keanu Reeves. And I honestly, the weird thing about that movie is when they decide, of course, they betrayed and dishonored their master, and eventually got revenge on the one who killed them, even though they
mm,
were forbidden
mm,
by the Lord.
mm.
But they said no, we have to regain honor, and so we would happily give our
Yeah,
lives. So, and for underlings and servants to have that base Lord, it's a very powerful moment
yeah,
for what do you call this? For servants to give their lives to the master. But
mm.
it's equally powerful, if not more powerful, when the master defends, or at least at least gives
Tries to.
tries to help
Yeah,
their servants.
yeah.
Like and in fact, this goes on to, should we go to the scene with the yellow dress, or
Wait.
maybe?
But
Yeah, yeah,
before that one, I think let's ground this further.
yeah.
Again, the maids, the household staff embodies the
Yes.
value of loyalty, which again is it's a human value. It's a natural, private, and even to an extent political value. But this is highlighted by the continuous reminder that the Marcoses were betrayed. So
Mhm.
this highlights the loyalty of the household staff, of those who
Mhm.
remained, because even amongst them
Yeah.
even amongst them there are some who have already broken
Mhm.
ranks. So actually loyalty was emphasized here by the Marcoses being portrayed
Right.
as surrounded by treasonous,
Mga ahas.
by traitorous people. That
Mhm.
even if they were betrayed by
Ramos and Enrile.
Enrile
Yeah.
and others.
And even like one of the staff,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
mentioned that
yeah.
apparently, I can't remember who it was,
Well, they
but
ate the
there
camp of
was,
Imelda Marcos, who quote
yeah,
unquote tried to assassinate the
yes,
Marcoses. So even if they're surrounded by such disloyalty, they still have the few, and again, this is a key term here.
all right,
This is what makes Filipinos are very romantic with the few
mm-hmm.
against the many, the small against the
Uh-huh,
large, the underdog. We have a
yes,
fascination with underdogs, and they made the maids double these the underdog status of the Marcoses. So it's
mm-hmm.
multiple layered. The first layer of underdog is the Marcoses being quote unquote surrounded and under siege, so they're already the underdogs, and then
Right,
you have the maids who are now the underdogs facing a mob.
mm,
So it plays with the fascination of Filipinos with underdogs,
right,
and it is this is what makes the damn thing effective.
yeah,
Just to sum up my comments on this Made in Malacañang.
mm,
Most reviewers that I have read have looked at it from the perspective of historical distortion and revision.
mm-hmm.
But if you would look at it from a political psychological perspective, this
Mm,
movie is a good survey of our limitations, the political
mm,
psyche of Filipinos, the limitations of the political psyche of Filipinos, the
mm,
strengths and limitations. Just to be fair, so
right,
what are the things that allows us to support leaders? It's this movie actually surveys it.
yeah.
So anyway, it's encompassing. That's why it's effective. It touches upon so many emotions. It's
I mean,
quite
if
amusing.
at one point when I was watching it, I'm reminded again that a lot of people believe that Marcus's was the closest thing we had to a royal family, kings,
Mm,
queens, prince, and princesses.
yeah.
But the weird thing, and I want to highlight this other scene a bit earlier in the film, wherein he was talking about like one of the maids, Beverly,
Mm.
played by Beverly something. One was outright like with a Ilocana, I believe,
Mm.
and then she was saying that hindi kayo pareho ng well. She was talking to Bong Bong, played by Diego Loizaga,
Mm.
and saying, you're not the same as your parents. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing. Just
Yeah.
because you are spoiled, pero
Mm.
sila nanggaling sa galing sa hirap.
Mm.
And the weird thing is that they remembered that when one of one of their fellow maids fell asleep on the job, Imelda would take off her shoes and
And tiptoe.
tiptoe so
Yeah.
she wouldn't, she would not wake up the maids. And
Mm.
for this gesture is like a very small, mundane issue, but for the common people, that's actually kind of heartwarming, don't you think? What do you
Yeah.
think about that scene?
That's the thing. You know, we
Yeah.
Filipinos are easily grateful for some things, and
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what had been highlighted by the role of the
Mm.
maids, that they are
Right.
grateful. They're grateful for small and mundane things,
Because their
and
lives are mundane.
mm,
Their whole life is living and
mm,
cleaning the house
yeah.
and going after the mundane needs of their
Mm,
clients, their masters.
mm.
So
So
yeah.
they are basically they are within the private sphere of the Marcoses.
Mm-hmm.
So they care little about the public that they are also part of.
Mm-hmm.
They are
Yes.
concerned with their private lives, which are intertwined with the Marcoses, with the private lives of the Marcoses, to be more specific. So, that's this is the thing about personality politics.
Mm-hmm.
Personality politics gives access to followers
Yeah.
to a supposed private sphere that
Mm-hmm.
makes that allows them to establish an intimate relationship with the leader. This is key in personality politics. Is
Mm-hmm.
personalistic politics is personalistic not because you're only emphasizing the personality of the leader. It's personalistic because the followers can establish
Mm.
intimate ties, intimate ties with the
Mm-hmm.
leader. Whatever that intimate tie is, that intimate tie may be shallow, it may be substantial, but that intimate tie would be there. So, and this was highlighted by the roles of the maids. So and again, this was reciprocated with what you're already going to mention, the last the one of the last speaks. Could you give a summary of that concluding scene?
Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I'm reminded of another scene first before we get to that.
Okay, go. Yeah.
Well, two things actually. Number one, there was this other scene, which is I think it was chapter 2 or 3. Well, anyway, these are chapters. There was this one that said that Ilocos or Leyte, and she was asking, questioning one of the, I think the guards, to see if like he was loyal, and
because
said,
he looks new.
He looks new. Yeah. But then he said Ilocos, and he said you signed or gave money for our wedding. So that's in a way patronage.
Yeah.
And now he is giving his service after like after the Marcos family helped fund their wedding. So I think this is also again what highlights, like, in some ways, I mean, this represents maybe a lot of relations with the direct influence of Marcoses. There's usually a lot of money involved. In fact, one of the first scenes, again, before that scene, there's a whole box of money, a whole stack of money, and it was like, oh, you should have given this to the poll watchers, the campaigners. And I was like, oh, so okay, there's a lot of money, and you admit to bribing them. I was like, well, no, this is a token for their time.
It's not bribery, it's a token for their time and their hard work.
That's another thing about like maybe spinning it, like people say, oh, that's vote buying, that's bribery, you're buying people. It's like, no, it's just tokens.
And it can be spun. That's the problem. From a legalist perspective, you can simply say, yeah, it's illegal. But from a political cultural perspective, the problem there is it can be spun, and it can be spun effectively, and it can be excused because it's also a value to show gratitude beyond what is required. So what is required is just their wages, but it is also it's a cultural artifact to give more than what is required, to give something extra. So giving as a cultural practice. So that was the first. Yung pagbalik pa lang ni Aimee, count-count ng pera.
Money.
Count-count ng 50 pesos.
I mean, most people would say that, a lot, if you flaunt your riches, it's usually like a cultural no-no, even in the Philippines. But again, it's like, oh, daming pera. It's para sa mga tao nila. It's like, okay. But it's like, I mean, if you're a regular theater goer, I'm like, that's still messed up. Then again, it's like very early. You're not really seeped into it. But I do want to highlight this other thing, which is related to the again, how she outright said that, oh, Bongbong Marcos is spoiled, and that this in a way openly also pokes fun at the Marcoses. You'd have, of course, Aimee Marcos dressed in Madonna, which looks ridiculous but to the time, but apparently it's to spite her mother. Apparently you have literally, I suppose, like that quiet scene where Imelda's walking through her shoes. Okay, they're taking it on the chin. You'd expect it to parang inunahan na ng mga tao. Parang, oh, ang daming sapatos si Imelda. And you have, of course, well, okay, so it's like they're able to make fun of the Marcoses and how they depicted, of course, Bongbong, who, oddly enough, despite being the current president, was seen as, in a way, a meek, some people say called him a coward, but others inept, but at the same time confused young man. And maybe you can talk a bit about that before the final scene. There's a powerful scene between him and Cesar Montano, and both a real life, like Diego Loizaga and Cesar Montano are both a father and a son tandem, playing a father and a son character, playing Bongbong Marcos and Ferdinand Marcos Sr. So what can you say about like that particular scene, which actually is dressing down the current president as a teenager, a young man?
Okay. I would take this multiple levels before I link it with another general theme in the movie, which is about imperfection. So before we go to that general theme, the scene itself, first and foremost, Diego Loizagas acting is shit. So sorry about that, but it is shit. It was a stark contrast. Cesar Montano's acting took a peak in that in that scene as a father, as a stern father. So the role of stern father was there. But Juggalo Izaga's acting is just a mismatch. But okay, acting aside, the essence of the scene is only a father can, do that to a son. So only a father can do that to a son. So it's a moral undressing of that one. It's castigation. Only a father can castigate a son. Again, for those who haven't watched it, watch the entire scene if you want to know more.
It's
But
worth
again,
studying, actually.
yeah, but that's one. But I would link it to another part, which I think this was peppered in the other, in the other scenes. Only a son, only the father can undress or can castigate a son, but only a father can castigate himself. And that is what, Cesar Montano's portrayal of Marcos did.
Yeah.
So there were scenes wherein he doubted himself, that he needed, he showed that in despair, he would say he would rather die inside Malacañang.
Yeah.
Which is not really, and this is the link to another theme that I would like to raise, which is, I think it's an important one. And I have read multiple reviews of Made in Malacañang, and they have missed this. Filipinos wear imperfection as a badge of honor. We use imperfection as a way, to ground ourselves, to say that we are human. But the dark side of using it as a badge of honor is we can use it to excuse failure. What the movie did was, this is the thing. The movie did not need to glorify Marcos. It only did it implicitly by having his picture all over the place. And to an extent subtly, indirectly, by saying that, letting other voices other than Marcos say that we're the greatest, or they're the Marcoses were the greatest. But what the movie did was to humanize the Marcoses and to again emphasize imperfection as a badge of dignity under conditions of indignation. Yun ang ano din eh. This is what makes it dangerous to an extent as well. Yung again, going back to the scene between Ella Cruz and Cesar Montano, between the daughter and the father, the argument that wala namang gobyerno, wala namang pamahalaan ng perpekto, then add it up with ginawa mo naman ng nakakaya mo, you did your best, and that is enough to wipe away failure, or to excuse failure, not necessarily to wipe it away, but to excuse it. And this, I think, is the key propaganda of Made in Malacañang. And I think this is one of the main, if not the main thesis of it. So everyone who is analyzing quote unquote historical revisionism, they're missing the main thesis. And the main thesis is failure, public failure can be excused by appealing to private imperfection or to human frailty. So yun eh.
At that moment wherein, it's about, even at the end of that scene, it's like about a father and a son reconciling. Like, it's weird that he was, in a way, like, people saw him. He was scolding his son for wearing military uniform in the press conference. So it was a public, no. It was a public mistake. And then he just asked him, "So why are you trying to make a fool out of me?" I said, I'm paraphrasing again. "I'm wearing this because I want them to know that I'm on your side and I'm ready to fight." And he was even egging you on, saying that, if even according to General Ver, if there are people still loyal for us, if I fought, then we would win. And said that, but he did not. Again, this is an important thing. He did not want people. He didn't want his son to fight. This actually shows, I suppose, a mixed message. On the one hand, at that moment, Momo looked like a fool, but he was someone who wanted to defend his father and was willing to fight. But again, and this is the whole reason why, I suppose, the greatest counter-argument to the peaceful narrative of the EDSA as the peaceful revolution, it was because the Marcoses did not choose not to fight. He chose not to retaliate. Even it was highlighted at that moment, even though his son wanted to fight. So
for one reason or another, again, speculations, but for one reason or another, that fact must be accepted. There was no retaliation. We don't know the exact reason. The movie provided the old reason of Marcos being merciful.
Masyado kang mabait, Dad.
Yeah, yun eh.
Ikaw kasi.
Yun eh. And again, the arguments made to excuse or to explain what the Marcoses did during those last few days, these are very old arguments. I was a pro Marcos. I'm familiar with all of these arguments way before. It's not something new, unless you are thoroughly unfamiliar with the pro Marcos or the apologist mind. You will, if you're not familiar with how they think, you will find this new. But for me, these are old ideas being reprojected back at the audience.
And how did you feel watching that?
It was painful.
Painful how?
I know it's nostalgic because I used to believe in those things. I used to believe in those things, and so part of me needs to make peace with those and try to complete the picture because I could not easily dismiss those. But yeah, it's painful. But if you are a pro Marcos, then it's basically the movie projecting whatever you're believing in the first place back at you.
Yeah, which again, it's empowering in that sense, but again, only for the crowd.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's go to the last.
The last
scene. Very curious scene.
Yeah, which the way they depict not just the supporters but also the enemies, how they show their enemies, and of course this shows at the final moment they're about to evacuate, saying goodbye in their last sauna, quote unquote, and then all of a sudden, of course, they showed the yellow supporters, the supporters of Cory Aquino, people representing people power, as vandals, burning people with torches, breaking in and entering violently, and yet before they were
not burning people, burning people, burning things.
They were burning things. They're burning everything.
Arsonists. They're arsonists.
Yes,
burning people.
And before they were, it was of course Amy's idea, quote unquote, saying that okay, before we go, like so that you'll be safe and they won't hurt you, take a piece of my mother's dress, Imelda's yellow dress, and they began cutting it, the yellow dress, and then put it around their heads to disguise themselves as people power, revolutionaries, Cory supporters. And this is a touching scene because I don't know whether it's true or not. It's again a prized possession of their master, like Imelda's yellow dress, which is unpractical. I'm sure there are a lot of yellow fabrics around, but it's out of like a dress.
Yeah.
So I don't what does that scene?
And
what do you think about the scene?
Make the L sign as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Laban sign. So yeah, that was the. That. Okay. It just dawned on me on why that scene was a bit curious. It reminded me of the scene from Silence.
Suzaku Endo's Silence. Yeah.
When he told them just spit on it or step on the icon.
Yes.
So in order for them to survive, in order for them to not be persecuted.
Yes.
Did Daryl Yap watch that? Because if he did, that would be sick.
It's like connecting it to like your faith in Christ.
God. I hope he didn't watch it, but if he did watch it, and like I think he did.
But
I think
regardless of that, it's like taking a piece of your master. In other words, outright desecrating it. But
it's a very intimate item.
My flesh. Yeah.
It's an intimate item because it's a dress.
Almost like Catholic, almost like taking a piece of a body. It's the only thing that's more intimate in your dress is your body. So it's like taking a piece of it. It's like a weird religious ritual.
Yeah, it is. It's the closest. It's the closest thing that they could have with Imelda. Which is her dress. So Chusaku Endo's Silence. That scene reminded me. And I hope he didn't watch, but I think he did. If he did, that was just effectively sick. But yeah, that's the point there. They have offered their lives to their masters, and the masters repaid them, quote unquote, by giving something intimate to them in an attempt to save them. So, and they did. And they wore those, and they tried to sneak out of Malacañang.
Right.
That is just,
in a way, it represented how maybe a lot of Marcos supporters, what they did just to survive. They pretended to like Cory just so they won't be persecuted.
Yeah,
it highlights that that
that
image
feeling of
of the
persecution.
of the people power. It was a monstrous movement. Out of fear, they pretended. But again, so that could mean that there could be more people. It could be
Yeah,
more loyalists out there
loyalists
just
can
pretending.
loyalists can no, they're no longer pretending now, but they are
Yeah.
reminded of the times probably wherein they needed to hide.
So they feel less
So yeah, I
alone.
think that
Yeah.
last scene was, you know, a clear message to the supporters saying that this were us. This is what happened to us before. We needed to hide. We
Literally,
needed
parang
yeah,
kakore-kurisitan from
yeah,
the silence. My
yeah,
God.
yeah.
Yeah.
We needed to hide. We needed to hide our quote unquote faith.
Mhm.
So now
Messed up
yeah,
religious parody. Yeah.
and okay, just to be fair, other than that, and I think that this scene actually embodies the violence and the fear caused by that violence in any uprising.
Right.
Uh, revolutionaries can excuse the fear that such disturbance and such chaos a mob can produce.
Mhm.
Revolutionary can excuse that. Even I
Mm.
can personally. But
Yeah.
if you're an ordinary Filipino, it would emphasize, it would trigger your allergy for disorder
Mhm.
because and that is realistic. There were clashes between pro Marcos and anti Marcos people during that
Mm.
raid in Malacañang,
Yeah.
and
Their people were hurt. It's not bloodless. Yeah.
there would always be quote unquote collateral damage in any political transitions of such
Mhm.
nature. Uh, but yeah, that was the perspective. So I think that scene, those last few scenes, embodied two perspectives
Mhm.
that people can empathize with.
Mm.
First, as you mentioned, and I do agree with this one, ngayon ko lang napansin din na, yeah, this was actually a message saying that we were forced to hide
Mm.
so that we will not be persecuted. So the perspective of the persecuted. The other perspective is the perspective of collateral damage or those who or the unintended victims.
Mhm.
So yeah, that last scene appealed to the all too Filipino allergy for disorder,
Yeah.
and I have data for that. We are
Yeah.
allergic to disorder.
But one thing that kind of hit it home is that besides, of course, the theatrical dramatization of people burn, they spliced it with real footage of real like looters, real people like steal, like raiding Malacanang and saying this belonged to the Filipino people. Okay, that's the famous clip. But at the same time, they did not look. They look again. If you put them together, juxtaposed together, yeah, they all look like criminals. And these are supposed to be the people that represented the peaceful people power movement. But you are raiding someone's house. Someone say the people's house, but like the Versailles or something. So, but yeah, it's a scary picture. It makes them look like monsters, and it again blurs the line between this dramatization and history, which again makes the ending a bit more powerful. What do you think? Do you think that there's the use of the documentary clips and news items, the real ones?
For those who are familiar with the anger of Filipinos and the sufferings that they have endured, that would ground those images closer to reality. Because those were people who were angry. Those were people who had suffered enough. But if you would look at it alone, as it
Right.
is, without knowledge of or with ignoring
Right.
the sufferings of other people, if you would ignore the sufferings of those who raided Malacanang,
Yeah.
then you would simply say that they are agents of destruction, agents of chaos. And this appeals to, again, the value of quote unquote stability and peace, and order, and such, which Filipinos are very close to.
Did you see that clip like published by the Vincent Timmons fan page? It showed like a tita saying like, "Oh, kumusta yung pelikula?" Sabi, "Oh, naiyak ako kasi naawa ko sa mga Marcoses. Walang hiya ka si Cory." Yeah, it's like it did its job in doing that. It made the enemies look monstrous and made their side as the victims here. And it's even I thought it was effective. It ignores a lot of things, but with a magnifying glass, it's powerful. But
it's
sometimes
streamlined
that's what
and
drama
powerful.
does. Yeah. I mean, that's the reason why drama is drama. Literature is that it and way emphasizes certain things while ignoring others. Like real life has so many factors, but the reason why sometimes like a TV show as a studio is that it's so it can control the environment. Control what things can be said and what's not said, or what can be heard and not heard. So of course it ignores a lot of things, but as a dramatic, how you say, tool or propaganda,
As an appeal to emotions, it was effective
mhm.
because it's both in your face
Yes.
and Filipinos can relate easily with it.
Mhm.
So
Even with a cameo with Robin Padilla, I'm like what?
I was confused with that. What the?
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, it could have ended it there, but I'm like,
And
like,
that's Bonifacio multiverse.
oh my god, it's weird. It's like Cesar Montano also played Andres Bonifacio at one point, and so did Robin Padilla. So it's Bonifacio meeting Bonifacio.
Kung lumabas si Gardo Versosa doon, kompleto na eh.
Oh yeah. Oh, speaking of which, is that Cesar Montano is the one of the few actors that have played Jose Rizal, Andres Bonifacio, and Ferdinand Marcos. Very prominent national symbols, So it's like, goodness, it's a masterstroke in casting, actually. And the fact that he has a son who can play Bongbong, his son, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. His Diego Loizaga's acting is just black.
But he did create a memorable line saying that, oh, babalik din kami, with his mother, Rufa Gutierrez.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that was creepy. Like them looking at each other's eyes. Like, what's it with the Marcos movies and the tendency for Oedipal loans? There's even an Oedipal theme in like Ginutang Tadhana, where Ferdinand Marcos Sr. had a lot of close scenes with his mother. So I was like,
Because that's royalty for you.
Well, not just that, but I suppose it's to highlight it's catering to Filipino values of
Yeah,
loving your mother.
we don't
Even
have.
in Ginawa Tanagdahana.
I think it's only Oedipal from a middle class educated perspective, but
A Western perspective,
from an ordinary Filipino's perspective, I don't think it's not.
Yeah, what's up? We love our mothers. Yeah.
Yeah, we just love our mothers, so that's something that it's emphasized even
PI
in that
podcast
movie.
loves their mothers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so and of course the very last scene is the famous scene about Cory. Maybe you can speak quickly about how they. I mean, honestly, they could have ended with like Amy picking up the flag. That was a powerful moment.
Yeah.
But apparently they had to have like one last scene where said, "I want them out of the Philippines." Like Cory wanted them out of the Philippines and playing mahjong with nuns, which is again caught a lot of people's attention in the media. So what can you say about that?
They made a cartoonish version of Cory Aquino.
She even had a hair roller.
Yeah, have a hair roller, and her hair looks like a wig, and it's a cartoonish version.
Yeah,
It's probably done out of spite.
clearly. I mean, it was really effective even without it. I mean, without.
But that was that was my response to that one is, how dare you speculate about things outside Malacanang? The topic of your movie is about what goes inside.
Right.
So how dare he speculate about something that went outside?
I mean,
so I
in
think
that sense, it is distortion.
That is distortion.
Yeah.
That is distortion. Okay, it's distortion not only because it's false, but because it dared to move outside the topic.
Yeah. They couldn't help themselves, I guess.
They couldn't help themselves. They just hate the Aquinos that much, which is again understandable. They have been portrayed as cartoonish for the past few decades as well. So payback time.
Oh my, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as in terms of the integrity, it was powerful that again, Imelda played by Kristen Reyes is picking up the flag. Yeah, that was a nice scene.
Yeah,
it should have ended there.
Yeah, but they had to. They had to go with
twist the knife a bit.
Yeah, twist the knife a bit. But as far as I'm concerned, yun lang ang response ko sa scene eh. I'm not angry about whether it's true or not. How dare you move outside Malacañang and speculate about things that went outside?
Going outside their own framework.
Yeah, kaya frame mo lang is nasa in Malacañang eh. You're not supposed to deal with what goes inside, what goes outside.
So, and maybe something to cap up with this. Already 1 hour. Like, can we do another hour for Katips? I don't know. Maybe quickly.
No, the thing is, Katips is as you said, straightforward.
Yeah, I told you.
Okay,
There's
but
not, yeah.
again, just some final notes. Rupa Gutierrez's acting was, she had a limited role, but it was fine.
No way she was anything like Imelda, but
Yeah,
if she just walked slowly,
yeah,
dressing like Imelda, that's fine.
yeah. But,
We
I
get it.
think, yeah, okay naman na. But Ella Cruz's acting was fine. I think si Jagulo Cycle talaga yung acting na medyo basura. But other than that,
I mean, the maids were also fine,
yeah,
especially with Carla Estrada. I'm like,
yeah.
what? Like, she's normally like the queen mother, quote
Mm.
unquote. Like she's a big celebrity, but
Mm.
here playing a maid, I suppose it's a humbling effect. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
good role for her
But yeah.
as a prime, follower of the Marcoses, which
Mm.
again maybe true to life.
Mm.
So
And
yeah,
it's something. It is again just reiterate, this movie, do look at it from a political psychological perspective.
yes,
Find out the values, political values we have, and you would
right,
see it. Most of it is in that movie. It's a survey
yes,
of the limitations and strengths of our character, of
Mm.
our political psyche, and this is what makes the entire thing perniciously effective and effectively pernicious. It
Mhm.
can appeal to those. So yeah, I think that's my. Before I say anything else, we need to compare it with Katips. Before I say anything
But
else.
for
So,
this one, I think we have to recognize that Daryl Yap is good at what he does.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shit.
Oh damn.
It is. It is as it is. You must
And
say.
in a way okay, let's move on to the next movie,
Mm.
and in a way after that we were preparing to like this film since the way that it was funny thing, we did spend money on theaters, and while of course my money went to like Katips, paid for both the tickets. It was Borge who paid for the Maid in Malacanang. So he is the one supporting Daryl Yap.
Ang ina talaga hindi mo ako
Nilaglag
nilaglag talaga.
But if you don't want to wait for the streaming, but we in a way we're doing it so that you don't have to. But with Katips, a lot of people are saying, support this film instead, since it's about truer depictions of the time. And it was also a musical, which okay, we're expecting a bit of camp and a bit of unnecessary singing, and which is out of place. And we wanted to like this film, and we wanted this to be more successful. Right now, it's earning slightly more than Made in Malacanang, and people are almost saying it's your duty to watch this film. But when you watch this film, is it as effective or more effective?
Okay,
You want to say
what
yeah,
are our
you want to say
standards for
something?
effective again?
Well,
I
number
think
one,
I think
proper
yeah.
camera work.
Yeah. Oh
Because it
Jesus
was
Christ!
yeah,
The cameraman went rogue. He went nuts. He went mad with power.
yeah. I mean, it's as if they were using again stage choreography and stage aesthetics. They were acting as if they were on stage, but they're clearly. Well, it began in like the mountains. I'm like, but kayo na sa bundok? Like you're supposed to be like what? I suppose in the UP. So
Hey, why are you
anyway,
dancing there?
yeah. Why are
You know,
you dancing there? All right.
the thing is the substance. Okay. This I think this is something that. Okay, let's lay it out first. The
Right.
substance may be realistic, but the form is not.
Yeah.
This is the problem. This is my primary problem with this. Now, going back to the notion of what is effective or what is not, I think this was implicit already in our analysis of Made in Malacanang. But for me, my judgment of whether it's effective or not is whether there's a proper integration of personal and private affairs with political statements.
Yeah.
So I already said that it was effectively integrated in Made in Malacanang. But for Katips, the integration was loose. It was just loose.
Yeah.
You have on one hand very private issues, and the connection between them and specific political statements that are not subtle, that are very explicit, that are in your face.
All right.
The ties are not. It's not as clear. It's not as streamlined. Hindi siya yung. Kasi sa Made in Malacanang, private issue, private conversation, quote unquote. Then sinisiksik yung maganda yung pagkakasiksik nung political statement eh. Pero sa Katips hindi eh. And the thing is, it is aware of such a divide between the private and the public. It is aware of it. It's conscious of it. Especially the character of Lara.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
she,
Sorry, go.
yeah.
Maybe I should try and at least summarize it. Maybe Malacanang is more like, again, straightforward. It was the Marcoses evacuating Malacanang and how they dealt with the stress and drama of possible betrayal and were for their lives. That's Maid in Malacanang. Katips is about, again, a group of activists, some of them students, others professors. Again, being activists, fighting against, participating in first quarter storm. And then all of a sudden, martial law is declared. Some of them are tortured. Some of them lost their lives.
It's also a fight for their lives. Yeah.
Also the fight for their lives. And eventually, fast forward to the current day, and they are celebrating it in Batayog ng mga bayani. And that's it.
So both movies were struggles for their lives.
But the threats were different. The threat for Maid in Malacanang were the activists.
Yeah.
The threat for the activists is the martial law regime. Yeah. And clearly, I think it adds like old tropes, like them being "Welga kami," singing "Welga kami."
ang naisip ko lang, in both movies, Ramos was a threat.
There you go. Rest in peace, Ramos. But
he was a threat to Marcos during Maid in Malacanang, and he was a threat to activists when he was head of the PC.
There you go. But of course, the Paul is played masterfully, like particularly by Montconfiado, who was done well, but again, the camera couldn't focus on it properly. Like, what the heck?
The camera couldn't focus on shit.
But it was the first time I heard him sing, so that's interesting. As Javert, I suppose. By the way, I think we can call like the tips as Les Mis, a failure at trying to be Les Mis.
Yeah, it's Les Mis na nabili mo sa Divisoria. So it's too bad. It's discount Les Mis.
Okay.
So
I mean, clearly there's a lot wrong with it, but maybe we can start on what was good or interesting about this movie. Like, what did you take away from it? Yeah,
I think the moments wherein they're not singing or dancing, the actual dialogues were substantial. It was an exploration of, again, the great divide between the private and the public, the great divide and where they are linked. So for Katips, it emphasized that what links the private and the public, one of the links that had been highlighted in the movie, is actually loss. So the characters, many of them lost someone, and this is what links their privite lives to the public.
I mean, the first one, I mean, the first one was, I suppose, one character there clearly was a labor leader and a professor, Professor Kimpo, who is the father of Lara, one of the characters who mysteriously came back from the United States, which is an interesting. I think she's an interesting focal point of the film because she represents the apolitical, neutral, comfortable, privileged Filipino, and I think they were trying to again convert and educate, and of course instill character development, and which she does, which is interesting. It was dynamic.
It wasn't dynamic, but the lesson with Lara's case is something that they will not admit, and to an extent they are hopeful would not happen.
Right.
Even one of the songs admitted this one, which is the only thing that can make or convert someone is trauma.
Yeah.
They didn't quote unquote educate her in the film. They didn't. They tried to, but the only thing that made her change her mind
was the loss of her father.
Was knowing the loss of her father. So that is the truth that it's subtly recognized yet set aside with the movie, because they're hoping that people need not lose someone they love before they start fighting. But the fact is, they need to. Most people need to have trauma before they start fighting.
It's weird. Like, you'd think that she ideologically, she was actually resistant. They were bashing America. She enjoyed America. In fact, she was a famous Broadway actress. So and she was speaking English, although at some points she could speak and understand Tagalog, so it wasn't clear if she knew Tagalog or not. I don't know, it's confusing. At some point she anyway.
The dialogues were good, so that's they're good when they're not dancing.
Singing and dancing. But there was this other interesting confrontation, which I think is a key moment. Before they revealed that her father is dead, they were actually arguing again with perhaps the role of art again. Like for instance, she was playing with the piano, fiddling with it, and then they were interpreting it with again
poetry.
Casual comments on political economy, like foreign debt, like foreign debt.
No. She
corruption.
was playing piano, and they
Yeah,
were
they
providing
were political
poetry.
commentary.
It's poetry. It's poetry.
Political commentary.
Why won't you recognize this poetry? They're reciting poems.
Yeah, but they're like saying, there's this one man who isang tao lang na gumagawa ng batas na hindi ayaw ng kongreso. Parang it's it's political statement. Yeah,
it's poetry for them.
It's poetry, but it's like outright stating like fuck Marcos actually. So it wasn't subtle at all. You know, it's not, art is at least has some level of subtlety, but again,
it's poetry. Just recognize it. It's poetry. Okay, I'm fighting for Katips right now, even if I slightly hate the damn thing.
Slightly hate. Well, this represents in a way the unsubtle political poetry and art of activism.
It's not
so subtle. I suppose, but I don't know. It has, again, it has no. It did not convert. What's her name? Lucy? Lara. It did not convert her then. I don't think it could convert them now. Again, it's only through the loss of her father, of someone personally close to her, that eventually got converted. But I think it was she had the confrontation with Alet, who was at that time ang tandang sora na ng bagong katipunan. They refer themselves as a new katipuneros. And the tandang sora is the woman who would take care of the wounded. And most of the scenes there was in the headquarters, and they were arguing. What was that? Were they arguing over no, like she was actually belittling her for being apolitical, for being pretty, for being young and privileged, and being in a way maybe not apathetic, but detached from their struggle.
Yeah,
I think that they were annoyed that she wasn't empathetic to them or sympathetic to them. So, and then again, I don't know if it was all she wants is to meet with her father, and then all of a sudden that's when they reveal that your father's dead, and then she joins their side. So I suppose that dynamic there shows perhaps the dynamics of how the movement spread. It's basically how the regime killed loved ones. So it's not out of ideology. It's out of, in a way, survival. You wanted to survive, or maybe you wanted to stop. But eventually, if you fought them, following that scene, there's another street rally. Like 2 of them were captured. So, and eventually graphically tortured. We can move on to that later. But what do you think about that dynamic?
That's the thing. That was a message that was implicitly conveyed. I don't know if it was meant, but the explicit statement was that you need to fight because it's right. But the implicit circumstance is that many fight, or at least Lara or her kind do fight because of, again, personal trauma.
Right,
would be a great factor that must be taken into account. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that I can get from that. Did it flesh out why do they fight? It did. To an extent, it fleshed out the ideals that they have. But then again, this type of propaganda film is an in-your-face type. So again, motherhood statements, ideological pronouncements, and slogans and whatnot.
I mean, it doesn't really show you like how the Philippines was at that time. Only it's how the characters were affected by it, and it was them being killed and tortured on screen, electrocuted, literally pissed on. My God, like you were just singing songs earlier, love songs, and then all of a sudden,
I knew that it was
abrupt.
I knew that would happen.
Tone change of like being burned by irons and cigarettes, and then being like having their nails being like cut off and peeled off. It was like an actual like rape. Mon Confiado living his role as like, a rapist or a goon. Like, my goodness. I think this is a common trope among anti-martial law literature and movies in film genres. It highlights, which is something that was not shown in public, and perhaps I suppose, in a way, imagine like people just suddenly disappeared, and they depicted that. But to show what is originally imagined outright, just out of like, it's like you have nothing to compare to. There's no outright evidence that it actually happened except from the stories of people who have survived it. So for me, it's like, well, some people can find it gratuitous, but also it is a primary tool for a lot of activist literature and filmography. So I don't know. What do you think about this usage of gore and like graphic things? This was famously done with Piolo Pascual, who played one of the Bartolome boys in the Dekada 70, who went with the NPA and eventually was captured and tortured. So this was a mainstream film. And this is one of the tools, again, of the EDSA narrative, when during martial law, they tortured and killed activists. But at the same time, if you're from the other side, you'd say, but there are threats to the government, mga traidor. And again, traidor is a common, especially if it's a partisan thing, literature. It's a heavy theme in both films. You know, hinahanap din ni Aimee ng traidor sa Maid in Malacañang.
Yeah.
Rin. There was a traitor in the ranks. Yeah.
No, that's the thing. The traitor in the ranks in Katips, again, the primary traitor was Aleta's former lover, was actually a deep penetrating agent. So, but then again, the other traitor part, which is they dub the government as traitorous, it is to an extent one way to give substance to their claim that they're the new katipuneros. Again, that's another issue. I would go back to that one, but the image of katipunero is already a semi-mythical figure in our history and in our popular culture. To claim that you are this semi-mythical creature is, again, it can flop. But then again, going back to your question, what about this use of violence or depiction of violence? Again, it's a reminder that repression is brutal. Political stability, when accomplished violently, would entail such situations. It would entail such human costs. So it's a reminder for people that this is violence. I would not call it political violence. Politics ceases when violence occurs. So this is violence.
Hannah Arendt. Yeah.
But you know how the next question is, even if it is this, there are multiple ways to receive such depictions. If you're an activist, if you're progressive, if you're liberal, it would fire up your, it would fire up your willingness to fight for justice. That you are being exposed to such violence, and you would believe that such violence should not occur. And so, yeah, you would support what you call movements to stop such things from happening. Or if you're a radical, then it would prepare you for such things. As far as I'm concerned, I was watching, whenever I see torture scenes, such political scenes, I would say, okay, this may happen to me, so I need to think of ways to so okay. I will not allow myself to be tortured like that. I'd rather kill myself. So that's
or talk.
No, I'm not gonna spill or talk. I'm gonna kill myself before that happens. So I'm already preparing for that. So that's what that is what going so that is what always goes on in my head whenever I'm exposed to such portrayals of torture. I know that I could not withstand that, but I will not dare speak. Hence, I would just keep a vial of potassium cyanide with me.
Wow.
But that's that. If you're radical, you would be prepared with that.
Yes.
And of course, the image of a martyr.
Yeah.
If you are from the other side, you can receive it in two ways.
Yeah.
First would be you would excuse, as you mentioned earlier on, you would say that they're rebels and they deserve such things. You can say that if you're from the other side. So that is the more darker side of among Filipinos or human nature.
Right.
But I think the more important one would be how moderates would respond to that. And this is what would account for, I think, a larger chunk of our population, which is when they see such gratuitous depictions and realistic depictions of violence, what they would say is, okay, this should not happen.
I think that's
okay, but let me finish for a while.
Yeah.
I'm having a may plema ako konti, but how they would respond to that one, I think this would account for, my hypothesis, this would account for a larger chunk of Filipinos. They would say that it's bad that it happened, there must be justice, but they would say that in order for you to prevent such things from happening, you should not be an activist.
Yes, actually, that's the weird thing. I was about to say that, like, there's the way that the main cast is portrayed, they are very radicalized. They're very aware. They're woke, but they do not represent the average ordinary Filipino, and they're hoping we as the audience will make a connection like you did, where this might happen to me. But I don't think there were enough people that represented the average ordinary Filipino. Maybe it represented with the girlfriend, the art. I don't remember her name. But she was like very just. She was just brought in, like, oh, hello, excuse me, there's a curfew, and she was like very moderate, but I don't think she was utilized enough. And she wasn't. And I think another person that could have been, well, to an extent, Lara represented the radicalized moderate.
The
ideal. Moderate. Yeah, the ideal. That she was changed, namulat siya. But I don't know, something did not click. May kulang eh.
The average Filipino is not present in that.
Yes.
Because
in a way, the average Filipino wasn't made of Malacañang through the maids and the drivers, in the sense, or at least on their crowd. But in Maid and Malacañang, parang wala eh. She is
Katips.
privileged. She is, in Katips, she was privileged. Lara was privileged.
Yeah.
She was very rich. She was sent, and she was a Broadway star. So you want to convert Broadway stars?
This, to an extent, implies the conceit of activists. The average Filipino did not appear in that movie because they're the ones that they are fighting for.
So they should not speak. It's like, we're fighting for you, don't worry. We represent you. Yeah.
But when they do allow ordinary Filipinos to speak, then they have the dance number of Marcos loyalists.
Oh yeah, that one. I actually hated that one, wherein, the character of Art had a father who loved Apo. I love you, Apo. They just said, I love you, Apo, over and over. Like, okay, but why? But of course they said, he wants everything to be clean and orderly, which, okay, is valid, but there's a thesis statement, but not. They just said they want everything to be clean. They arrive with jobs. And I think, which is poetic, and I think I told this to you then, that despite him the father loving Marcos, it was his son that was captured, tortured, and killed. They did not show the father realizing that the person's killed, and that would have been a perfect moment for conversion, like radicalization. Like, sinuporta naman kita, Marcos, but pinatay mo yung anak ko. That would have been a powerful moment, but no, it was like, it's oddly enough that parang ang daming kulang, pero parang ang haba ng pelikula.
Was it longer than Maid in Malacañang?
It was 2 hours.
There's so much unnecessary dancing.
Exactly.
So, again, going back to form, that's why I said that Maid in Malacañang was more effective, because there was a clear alignment, an integration between form and substance. But Katips, the substance, it's there, but the form was just way off. It's tricky to transpose a musical into a movie. It's tricky. And if you do it right, if you make the dance and the songs naturally integrated into the scenes, meaning when you say natural or realistic, that means people would expect someone to sing in that instance. And they would act and move in a natural fashion. If you do that, then that would be a successful transposition. The problem is, it was not a transposition. It was not transposed. It was basically a theater production. Film.
Which again, if you just point the camera
stage.
at the stage, and it's like, oh, it's on stage. Okay, so we're just watching a stage production. Fine, but again, they acted as if they were on stage in like real life, which just made it awkward.
It became awkward.
the songs did not even forward. Okay, the first few songs, like, okay, it's introducing the characters. Okay, it's first quarter storm, and then nagbuwelga sila, but it did not forward the story. Like literally, one of oddly enough, one of the best songs was also the most unnecessary. It's like sakit na ng gulo, and they were just saying sakit na ng gulo, and they were falling in love. But it's like again, they're just showing off their singing skills, which fine.
Too
Like
much
I
one day
suppose,
more.
yeah.
They need to find a new composer for a new production.
Yeah. Are you? Is this your way of saying get me as a librettist?
This is my way of saying get someone else.
Yeah. Sorry,
But,
Vince Tanyada. I mean,
sorry,
well
it's
intentioned, but yeah.
well intentioned. It's an apt tribute to those who suffered under martial law, but as a movie, bleh.
I suppose we can quickly remark on how it ended, which is basically, it shows eventually the aged activists in Pantawid na Bayani, which is a real monument and a real museum, which again memorializes activism, the nuns in tanks, and the time they spent. But it kind of, and of course, they sang a happy number at the end, remembering the people that lost their lives, the real people, in the backdrop. When in the front drop, you have like the actors. So again, it's not anymore spliced. You have history on the background, and then the drama on the foreground. So at least there, it's at least a touching, real tribute to activism. But it kind of makes you, again, I told you this, it kind of makes you ask the question. And before even that scene, it was just them losing and losing their loved ones, mourning over the ones they lost, especially the gruesome death of Alit, the Tandagsora. And after that, there was the Ninoy's funeral, and then people power. But it didn't really show that triumph. It didn't even show that it was activism was triumph. Because remember, EDSA turned because of like Ramos, Enrile, and Cardinal Sin, which are elite actors in some ways. So is it really a victory of the average ordinary activist? Because sure, the average activist can say, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure, you started it. They had the momentum. Some of you gave your lives, but if they continued, would the regime fall?" So I don't know. That's my question there. But what do you think about the use of pantayog?
Yeah, regarding that, I think I would leave that as an open question and an issue, which I think should be settled because they're just skirting around this issue for a long time.
Right.
But they need to settle this. Elaborating on what you mentioned, who writes history and who moves history? Again, there are different ways to address that issue. You can say that again, big elites shape history. So there's historical
steer maybe.
There's historical doctrine for that. They've been emphasizing elites, but then again, there's also the argument that history is moved by the small, the little guy, the ordinary, the average, the mundane. But then again, the movie to an extent emphasizes the latter, which is history was moved by the average, the small, the mundane. And the minor characters, not the elites. If you are to maintain logical consistency with that argument, then you need to shift some blame away from the Marcoses as elites and to the likes of the policemen who were arresting
Simon Confiado, the actual people who tortured and killed.
Actual people tortured and killed. So if you want to maintain logical consistency, then you must admit that. So that's a problem.
Yeah. Did we even prosecute them?
I think they are. They're being prosecuted, but the public discourse right now blames everything on Marcos. So
Marcos didn't even appear in the Katips.
There's a misalignment between the argument to praise activists, which is basically the small, the little guy, the average. There's a misalignment between praising them and putting the blame on a few. So again, that they would say that it's command, it's command structure, it's a hierarchy of command. But that's one way to address that question, and to an extent, that is no longer holding. You know, you could not convince people with that, because Marcos supporters can easily blame his subordinates. How the hell do you deal with that?
Right.
So, yun eh. I'll leave that to our listeners. But that is something that you must settle. Yun eh. If you actually want to converse with the other side, because that's the reason of the other side. So, yun naman yun eh. Then again. How did you feel after watching the damn thing?
Honestly, embarrassed, because it's my money I spent on the tickets for that movie. And at the same time, embarrassed for UP, because it's the logo of UP was proudly worn by the director, who also starred as one of the primary characters. Again, while there are good possible issues raised, like the role of art, the radicalization, of some, the reality of torture, it was just simply presented. There wasn't a lot of tension, because in a way, if you want to present an idea, you need to challenge it from its counter, from its opposite. At least there was in Maid in Malacañang, there's some tension there with like the monstrous yellow Cory supporter and the Marcos loyalist.
May opposite
But
naman
here
din.
it's like, but the opposite
Lara.
din, but it's
Lara to an extent.
Lara and like Monconfiado and the Metropole.
Yeah.
But there were caricatures. There were theatrical caricatures. And cinema, you could do much more in cinema. And in a way, they did do adjustments for cinema. Like what you said, maybe there were more talking scenes that allowed for transitions, and to have a break between the singing and dancing.
And give more power to the cameraman who went mad with it.
Yeah, nakakahilo talaga siya. Like even just looking through the camera work, it's chaotic. So I feel like it's an inexperienced foray, or like an attempt in presenting a movie like that.
A musical.
There's movie. There is good in it, but because the camera work and direction wasn't as focused, it was too loud and bombastic, then the message is lost with a lot. A lot of things could have been edited out.
Yeah.
Certain things could have been added in, like the tension between, like that was honestly, that was it would have been a great moment where a Marcos supporter lost their son. That's a great radicalization. Dapat sumama siya sa huli, di ba? Mga dayon, di ba?
Yeah. Anyway,
great moment.
To our listeners, I think our listeners are currently saying right now, you're nitpicking in form. Please, ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at artistic artifacts, or propaganda artifacts. There must be an alignment between form and substance.
Tsaka bilang karaniwang tao na nanonood ng ganyang pelikula, nakakapagod talaga yung Katips. Kasi sa Maid naman na kanyang parang pwede naman maging typical MMF film. It's easy to digest. They're just people in a house. Ito, ang daming nangyayari. So, as a simple person, like you can watch it in a movie, it's difficult to watch.
The songs could have been recorded.
So,
the songs
could
have been
recorded.
No, the songs could have been recorded without being performed.
They were dubbed.
They could have been background music. Anyway, it's again the form mismatched with the substance, and the substance conveying the substance.
So in this battle, sadly, based on our reading and analysis, at least, while we do not agree with the thesis of Maid in Malacañang, it is more coherent and more.
I hate to say this.
Well, more focused. So that's the sad thing about this dual box office battle.
Propaganda fight. In the propaganda fight, Maid in Malacañang won.
Well, what do you think can both films do better?
Stop.
That's stop. Yeah. Tigilan na natin to.
No, but okay, I will start with Katips because I have high hopes for this. Liway already exists as a frame. Liway is a good frame. I think, and again, there are good models for transposing musicals into movies. So any subsequent attempts to do the same thing should learn from those. And again, marami should it be preachy? That's the thing that I would like to emphasize.
Both are preachy.
Both are preachy. should Katips, or should the likes of Katips, or should any succeeding productions that are, consequent or just like Katips, should it be preachy? I don't think it should be. It need not be preachy, and it would appeal to more people if it is not. And if it would appeal to more people if they have more characters that they can empathize with, because not everyone can empathize with activists. Not everyone can. Too bad.
Right.
So if you want more and more people, if you want the average inactive person to empathize with, you need to show a character. You need to flesh out a character like that.
I mean, I just realized that besides, of course, the element of Tangdang Sora, which is interesting, like eventually Lara inherits that role from Alet, which is actually for me a touching moment.
Yeah.
But besides that, it is basically expressed, the same thesis is expressed in Dekada 70, which I reviewed both the musical and the movie, and both at least are more coherent and tolerable than Katips. So when you're saying the models exist, yeah, Dekada 70, the musical and the movie.
Yeah.
So it already exists. So if they re-released Dekada 70, it would have had more of a fighting chance. At the very least, I suppose that could be a good recommendation, I suppose, but I'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's just, yeah. So yeah, final remarks. I suppose we should say this again. These are not necessarily historical authoritarian materials. I suppose it represents authoritative historical documents. These are dramatizations of historical narratives, interpretations, and take each with a grain of salt. And when making it, it's important to stick to the fundamentals of narrative and filmmaking. Don't go crazy.
Don't go crazy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think regarding one final remark, just to add up to what you said, this may not be historically factual. Again, if you want historical facts, watch a documentary. Watch a documentary or make one. But don't expect such a thing from a movie. It's quite stupid too. But we must appreciate these two movies not really as historical documents depicting our past, but this is our way of making our history. These are our attempts to settle our current crisis in political identity. So I think this is the appropriate way to appreciate these two movies. Because this is what their substance is all about. It's about presenting a political identity to those who view it. Okay.
I don't know. Maybe one last thing before that. Is there something wrong with like humanizing the Marcoses? Because humanizing even villains is dramatically interesting in the way, Milton humanized the devil of all people, like Lucifer. There's even a series about Lucifer, literally the devil humanized as a protagonist. So is there something wrong with that?
No,
of course
think
there's political ends, but
no, I don't think there's something wrong with it. Going back to Milton and the subsequent genre of humanizing Lucifer, it is not. There's nothing wrong with it if it opens up a grand avenue for more humanizations, for a more diverse exploration of a controversial figure like Marcos. So again, the challenge is, I would leave this to our listeners. If you know someone from the progressive camp who is a director, or probably Vince Tanyada right now, I'm probably addressing you directly. Make a movie about the Marcoses. Do your
play
own
their game.
Play their game. Provide a fair-handed assessment, a humanization of the Marcoses, a grittier one if you want. Okay, so it match up yung Gadaril Yap already admitted he doesn't do that much research. Then match that up. Do your research. There are many books, eyewitness accounts of those people who are also close to the Marcoses during the last few days. So it is a challenge for progressive filmmakers right now. The avenue is open. They have humanized the Marcoses. It is not. They don't have a monopoly over that right now. So you can do that. You can do that as well. The same thing if you want to humanize the Aquinos, if you want. Meron bang movie on the Aquino? I think there were already movies on the Aquinos, but not that
there's
many.
one with starring Coco Martin, which is about literally following the Noy Noy Aquino campaign. There is, I'm trying to remember. Well, there's some maalaala mo kaya, I think, about Cory.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
those are weak, but
yeah,
I think it's time for the Marxists. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with humanizing if and only if it opens up an avenue for more attempts, a more diverse,
grounded on facts.
I would say I think all of them would be grounded on pieces of facts.
Yeah.
But if you want something grounded on facts, you need the documentary for that. But for movies, it's about exploring different dimensions of the humanity of that character.
Yeah.
So this movie showed Marcos as a frail human being in desperation.
Who loves his family.
Who loves his family. Someone would show Marcos, probably in the future, someone would show Marcos as the great dynamic leader. I am expecting Daryl Yap to make a movie about the young Marcos as a young dynamic lawyer who fought his way out of a conviction.
I mean, Tadhana tried to do that, but again, it's in black and white.
Yeah,
it's really old. So
they probably
an updated
do that.
version of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, or probably have that and
like young Sheldon, young Marcos.
yeah, show the dark side of Marcos, and not the caricature version of him.
Yeah,
just show his conniving, quote unquote, Machiavellian dimension. Again, I'm using that one with great qualifications, but for our listeners. So probably House of Cards version of Marcos. Jesus. So marami. There are multiple ways to exploit this. So Maid in Malacañang is an opportunity for progressive filmmakers to take advantage of humanizing Marcos.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a hard discussion. Oh my God.
Kasi nasakit ka sa ulo po, tangin eh.
Kahit ngayon eh. Sumakit ang ulo ko dati. I've tried to nagbanlaw ako with Netflix of Sandman and it was great. That's a recommendation, but I go. It is, at least now we've analyzed. Actually, I still have more to say, but yeah. Let's move on to recommendations so that we can continue the conversation with other materials. And I think for this recommendation, we have a special offer with a new partner. And I think, of course, our podcast is partnering with other brands. In this case, we have talked about their books before. It's, of course, the Ateneo de Manila University Press. And they have generously offered a promo code for our readers, which grants 20% off on all books at Shopee. And this, of course, if you want to have to avail this code, simply type in ATENPIPOD. That's ATENPIPOD. ATENPIPOD. That's ATENPIPOD. So that'll give you 20% off on all books. And of course, as part of this partnership, we promote, and we have consistently promoted their books before, like for example, Wataru Kusaka's Moral Politics in the Philippines and Patronage Democracy, Clans, Clients, and Competition. You know, those two are great books. You should buy them. You may use that to buy that. Or you can, more related to this topic, we have one of their new books called Keeping Memories, Film Archiving in the Asia Pacific, edited by one of the few film historians in the Philippines, Nick de Ocampo. But and while he brings together, of course, experts from various parts of the Asia Pacific, you know, the experience of Hong Kong movies, Vietnam movies, Philippine movies, etc. And while, of course, remember, in a way, it's also a good promotion of a lot of important films, important for national identity of certain countries. You know, it moves sometimes to the decision of funding for archives. A lot of the times they run out of funding, so they resort to at least selling them, or maybe just they end up being sold for the silver in the reels. So nangangalakal nila yung yung mga bakal. So it's sad. And they're faced with the decision of which films to discard or which to keep, which is sad. And sometimes we can ask ourselves, how many of the Filipino classics are being properly maintained or properly being archived or even converted digitally? There's digital archiving, which some have been doing, while others are still have yet to do. So it's both an inspiring thing if you are a film buff. It's very niche, but at the same time, it kind of opens your horizons to a lot of kinds of films. Some are documentaries, others are like important films like Dalagang Bukid for the Philippines. And you have I remember, I'm not sure if this is, but this is not mentioned in the book, but I remember this short film in Cinemalaya. They showed that apparently the original film of Genghis Khan, which is one of the first earliest films, is actually being, but it's in need of preservation, but it's apparently expiring in a closet somewhere in San Francisco, I think, or Florida. I can't remember which. Which is sad because Genghis Khan apparently was at its time, one of the best made Filipino films about, they were surprised that they had authentic Mongolian horses, which were regular Filipino horses. So yeah, but apparently the CCP and the film authorities in the Philippines aren't buying it. So that's one story that may not be in the book. It's related. So yeah, it kind of gives you the issues of archiving. And one of these days, maybe we can bring Nick de Ocampo to discuss it. So we're able to. What can you say about this book, Borge? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start reading it soon.
Yeah.
Start reading soon. But I think before we get Nick de Ocampo here, of course, I will read it.
Okay. Anyway, so besides that, do we have any recommendations?
Yeah, recommendations. Well, I don't have any books to recommend for now. I would leave that to our next episode on propaganda and history. But for now, I would have several movies. Again, I'm a fan of biopics and historical drama. So I know where I'm speaking from. So my first recommendation would be again the musical Evita would be there. I think I already recommended this one before.
Oh yeah.
But no more explanations for that. If you want to watch a proper adaptation of a musical into a movie, that would be one model. But I would also recommend Eva Peron, The True Story, which is another movie. Provides a more realistic and more grittier account. It's a movie about Eva Peron as well. And again, these are very controversial figures. Another one which I would gladly recommend, two movies, I think. First would be looking at a political event from different perspectives had been one of the main themes of films regarding the French Revolution. And I think the most recent one, 2018, entitled One Nation, One King, looks at the French Revolution from the perspective not only of its elites per se, but from the perspective of ordinary peasants. So this is the twist that this movie provided. Albeit it's a bit medyo sumabog siya because they're trying to make a balance between the perspective of ordinary citizens and of course elites. So medyo sumabog. But again, you would still see the gritty side of it from the perspective of those who are actually trapped trapped in such tumultuous times. But regarding, I think this would be one of the better biopics of a controversial historical figure, Danton. This was released 1983. It stars Gerard Depardieu as Danton. So Danton is a controversial figure. Again, his character here was fleshed out alongside fleshing out Robespierre. So it's actually dual. So it's actually double film, but it focuses more on Danton. So Danton is one of the fathers of the Reign of Terror. He's one of the fathers of the committees justice. He was actually one of the architects of the very mechanism that caused the Reign of Terror, but he left and retired. So this movie is about him coming back, trying to stop the Reign of Terror. So it's him trying to redeem himself.
Right.
It's him trying to redeem himself. And there was one key scene here that actually embodies the contradiction.
All right.
So he was in prison, and someone in the jail, like, he was walking through the jail. Someone in the jail grabbed him and said that you're finally with us. Because that person was in prison because of him. So that's this great irony of it. And so yeah, just watch this. I think it's available in YouTube.
Yes.
I'll link it up with YouTube. So
yeah,
it's a good film.
right. I have a few recommendations actually. First, I think one thing that Katips tried to do, but kind of this did first and done better, was the guy that's at the end of the movie, and I think you can watch it. It's starring Vilma Santos, Christopher De Leon, Piolo Pascual, Marvin Agustin, a lot of the best actors of their time, actually, and it's one of the most awarded films. I suppose weird, like Katips was a heavily awarded in Famas. I suppose these are political awards, but Dekada does the same thing, but at least it's a bit more watchable. So yeah, and of course, if the musical is filmed, I think well, the songs aren't as much better, but it's more well integrated. It forwards the story a bit better. And I think another good film that I suppose Made in Malacañang kind of took notes on, possibly, but also in a way this one did better in humanizing an individual, is Quezons Game, starring Ramon Malacañang, and you and I watched that before.
Yeah.
I think in portraying at least, at the very least, the small spaced political character dramas, but also how, again, the political interacts with the private and encroaches on the personal, and how, of course, his failing health also depicted the failing of his administration, but in a way, his resolve allowed him to save a lot of Jews, the Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany. So and he wasn't invincible, but it was a good balanced drama on a very, very iconic president of the Philippines. I suppose Liway would be there. This is the third time I would recommend it, but in a way, it does what Made in Malacañang did, but for NPA people. It highlighted the NPA people, Commander Liway, as a mother, as a wife, in the same way that they humanized the Marcoses. So it also fleshes out, of course, the tensions between them and their opponents. It depicts Marcos loyalists as well, and even the authorities as three-dimensional humans. So you can watch this on YouTube, freely. So yeah, I think a lot of Filipino films have done what both these films have tried to do before. So it's good to compare and study both of that. Yeah. But I think before we leave, we recommend our listeners to watch either or both films? Because we've done this so that they don't have to, and we have tried to extract the important insights. But what do you think? Do you have to watch it or
no? If you have spare money, fine, go ahead, watch it. But I think whether you decide to watch it or not, going back to what I said before, these two movies, they're not friendly to non-partisan entities.
Right.
They're not.
Yeah.
So watch at your own risk.
Okay. Yeah. Although at least if given the choice at gunpoint, I would say maybe through streaming you can watch Made in Malacañang just to know what they're being fed, and so you can combat it effectively, not through facts necessarily, but through, again, character drama, because sometimes it's drama that and poetry in a way that changes the hearts and minds, not history books, although history books are important as well. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize that Daryl Yap is dangerous and is good at what he does, but we have to understand why.
He is dangerous.
Yeah, in some cases, even if you're informed in history, you can get yourself carried away with the human power of the human drama. But yeah, perhaps we can get back into these films soon. Maybe we can bring in a roundtable of our friends from film and history to discuss this technicalities further. But that is a hearty discussion. Thank you, Borge, for having me process this, and of course, accompanying me to inspect this box office battle. Thank you, listeners, for being with us in this experience. As usual, you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, and Anchor. You may send us an email at pipodcastph@gmail.com. Until the next episode.
Magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.